So in this next two-part video, we're going to add some interior lighting to the scene. And these interior lights are going to turn on as the daylight system gets dark. So we had the animation file we were working with in the previous video. And I've got to set some settings here to go back to just rendering out a single frame. So you can hit F10, and under my common parameters, right now it's set to export out an animation file. So I'm going to change my time output to single. So now I want to just start rendering single frames again as I add these interior lighting. So the width and height I'm changing to 640 by 480 pixels, a little bigger so I can see it when I render it. And under render output, I'm going to turn off save files, so just uncheck it. Now when I work with the file, I'm just rendering single frames again. Under indirect illumination, I'm going to turn off final gather for now so that it takes less time to do my test renders as I add the lighting. And then under the processing tab, I want to turn off material override. So I'm going to click on the checkbox there to turn it off. We had that gray material that was overriding the other materials when we did the walkthrough, or not the walkthrough, the daylight system animation in the previous video. So I'm just going to go to a frame and do a test render. Some just after noon or so probably here. Let me check. If I go under the setup of my daylight system, and under hours I'm at like 10 a.m. Going to go a little later in the afternoon. And just so the front of the building is lit pretty brightly, just to do a test render to see how fast it's going to render. I want pretty fast render times. With final gather off, it's lower quality, but it doesn't matter because I just need to be able to render quickly. And that's pretty good render time. Main thing is I want to be able to see the lights turn on inside once I add them in there. So I need to find a frame now where the daylight system starts getting pretty dark, basically when the sun is setting. So I'm going to go about frame 250. And I'm going to do a test render again, just hitting the teapot icon up there to render it. So now pretty dark. This will be a good frame for the indoor lights to turn on. So I'm going to ultimately animate an indoor light, actually two lights, turning on at this particular frame, at frame 250. So this will work out good. The windows in the front here, the lights will show through there, and there'll be some reflections on the landscaping. So that's a frame I'm going to work with. Now I'm going to zoom out of my top and front view a little bit so I can see my objects a little easier. I'm going to do a check here. I'm going to go under the Create panel. Third button there is Lights. I'm going to add an MR area light. And in my top view, just going to throw a light in there. I want to see where my zero elevation is. So anytime you add a new object in Max, it automatically goes to zero elevation. If I go into the Move command now and right-click over the Move icon, notice the Z setting there is 0 feet. So you can tell my Revit model now is way too high. It's basically floating up in space several hundred, maybe 100 feet or so. So it's too high up. I'm going to have to move that down. I basically just want a reference so it's going to be easier to add these interior lights and know what height to put the interior lights at. So one way to do that, I'm going to zoom into my top view here. So this is those windows that are showing in front. It's basically the living room of the building. This is where I want my lights to shine through. So I'm going to click on one of the pieces of furniture in here. It's just a chair. What I want is a reference point basically of the top of the floor of that particular room so that I can add a light in there and it'll just be easier to move the light around. So that chair, I'm going to zoom into it. A little tough to see in my front view. So I'm going to right click over the chair and turn on Isolate Selection. And what that'll do is just hide everything else except the chair. So notice that XY gizmo there in the front view. The bottom of that gizmo is at the bottom of the chair. That's what I want to make the 0 Z height or reference. So if I right click over the Move command, I can see the Z height is at 100 feet right now. So I want the bottom of that chair to be at 0 elevation basically. So I'm going to move everything down. So I'm going to exit my isolation mode. My front view, I'm going to zoom out. So what I want to do is move just the entire model down 100 feet. So in the front view here, notice the y-axis is the gizmo that's pointing straight up. So to move that building down, I have to go in a negative direction in the y-axis. So I'm selecting all the objects here. My Move command is on already, so I left-click to make sure that's on, and then right-click. And now under the Offset screen, I'm going to change the y elevation to minus 100 feet. I want that entire building to move down 100 feet. The model just didn't come in at the right elevation when I brought it in from Revit earlier, so I'm just fixing that. And I could have done this early in the process. It just wasn't really an issue until I put these indoor lights in. I'm just trying to make it easier on myself here. So the model's been moved. Now I'm just going to go into my perspective view. I did a zoom extents. I clicked on the lower right corner of the screen there to just be able to see the model in each view. And on my perspective view, just hold my wheel mouse down and panning and zooming to get that view back that I had before where I was looking at the front of the building. And just clicking out in space there just to deselect everything. So now I'm at the proper elevation. Basically that floor that chair was sitting on, the floor, the room where the lights are going to go, now I know the top of that floor is at Z equals 0. It's at 0 elevation. So now when I put a light in here, it's going to go right at 0 elevation. It's basically going to sit on the floor of that room. Then I'll be able to move the light. So now I'm going into my lights again over here in my Create panel, the MR Area Omni, selecting that particular type of light. And then in that room, in the top view, easiest place to put a light is in your top view. And it's going to be a little tough to see, but in my front view, I'm going to zoom in. The light right now is sitting right on the floor. And you just kind of get used to seeing through all the different objects and trying to find stuff. Now I want to move that light upwards, so I'm going to right click and notice the Z-axis is at 0, so that light is sitting on the floor. I'm going to move that up to about 15 feet. So inside that room, I know I have a high ceiling. I'm going to move that light up 15 feet. And a little hard to see. But you can just see with that gizmo, since the move icon is selected, the move command, the gizmos show. So a little easy to see. And that's a little high. Now I can just manually move it. I'm hovering over that Y-axis in the front view and just moving the light down a little bit. Then I'm going to right-click over the move icon, and it went up a little over 8 feet. So that might be a little too low. So I can just move it up a little bit. So you can precisely enter in that elevation or just move it manually. It's really whichever you prefer. So top view, this is basically going to light that half, that side of that room. Now I just hit H on the keyboard, and under my display settings up here, I just have lights selected, display lights. And notice my daylight system shows up in my new MR Area Omni. It's an easy way to select objects. I can just double click on that Area Omni light, and that selects the light. Because it can get hard to select objects when there's a bunch of things going on like we have here. So now the light, I want to clone the light. I want to have a second light in here. So my move command is on. I'm holding control down and just moving that other light upwards. So it's a quick way to copy any object. And I'm going to make the object an instance so that whatever change I make to one light, it'll make the same change to the other light. If I wanted one light to have a different brightness, I would have to clone it as a copy. But I want it to be an instance so that I can control both of them at the same time. So I can just select one light, change settings and properties, and it'll also change the other light. So now with that second light selected, I want to start setting some of my initial settings, some changes I want to make. So I'm going into the Modify panel, the second tab, and my light type is on, my shadows are ray trace, which are good to use. Notice other intensity, color, and attenuation. I can click on this color swatch, and I'm just going to give the light a little different color, just add a little yellow to it. Let's say it's some kind of incandescent bulb. So I'm going 255, red, a green value of 240, blue value of 150, just to give it some yellow. And I'm just going to click OK, and you can see the change in the viewport. Now since that other light is an instance of this light, I can click on the second light, and it also changed. So it also has that color change on it. So any change I make to one light is going to change the properties of the other light. Another thing I want to change under decay here, I'm going to go to inverse square. I want to just control how far that light's going to, basically the radius of light's going to be. So I'm making the start about 60 foot, and you can see the gizmo, the radius of that light. I want that light to extend out of the windows and then shine on the landscape. And that's a setting you always have to change. So in the second part of this video, we'll add some more changes to the lights and actually animate them.